Can you feel the power, folks? There's a reason for that. We got Carter here, Power Hour, LSU, NFL, SEC. It's all there. Please look it up on YouTube. Carter, what's going on today? How are you?
Doing good, Mark. Getting excited. Just got a PS5 a few weeks ago, so I'm gonna be playing the new game. I got it just for the game and maybe the soccer one, but super pumped up about that and super pumped up about the season.
July 19th, I believe, is the date that everyone's awaiting.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
rankings are all over social media. Do you have an issue with the rankings?
Yeah, I wouldn't have put LSU in the top 25 until we actually see what they look like next year. I think by the end of the year they could be top 25 because I'm a big Blake Baker fan. But yeah, LSU at 6 is pretty fair. I think Colorado's defensive ranking is more egregious than LSU's, and yeah, I actually think Ole Miss's defense could be potentially pretty good this year. So I am super excited to see the dynasty modes playing online, all that stuff. It's all kind of new to me. I feel kind of like a boomer because I've not owned a video game system since college, so it's been over a decade. But yeah, I'm learning everything over again. I'm pretty excited.
Well, the distance between me and video games is even greater than that. But,
Huh? Huh?
I kind of went through two phases. I went through the teenage years into college, not even into college a little bit. Football, baseball, the sports games I would play. Anyway, then it was out of my life. And then I had kids. And then, boom, with a son, you get back into it. But that was a
Yeah.
long, long time ago. Speaking of rankings, I was just reviewing Athlon. I was looking at Phil Steele. We've got Phil Steele with LSU of a ranking of number 20 in the country, 19 when he applies the schedule. He's got them fifth in the SEC. Athlon, interestingly enough, has LSU at number 11 in the country, substantially higher than Phil Steele, but number 6 in the SEC. You have stated on here that a college football playoff appearance has to be the goal and basically the bottom line objective
Yeah.
for success. That is the breaking point.
Yeah, I'm with you. And look, we all know SEC schedules are tough, but they're not created equal. Even though LSU has to play 2 Power 5 out of conference teams when you're only required to play 1, I think their schedule sets up really nicely for them to make the playoff this year. And 9-3 might be good enough, but 10-2 is definitely attainable. It's just going to come down to the defense, right? But overall, I'm fine with LSU being ranked. They're normally ranked in that range. Some years they're in the top 5, but normally they're in that 7-ish to about 12-ish range. It seems about normal.
The road schedule is pretty favorable for an SEC slate. Most of the tough games at home.
Yeah. Yeah. And, the big game, the team to me in the SEC that is the story I feel this year in college football outside of Colorado, which will always be the biggest story while Dion is still there, just by pure clicks and interest, is Ole Miss. And I think the way that the game sets up, where Ole Miss will be playing their 7th game in 7 weeks, and LSU will be getting a bye week before playing Ole Miss at home, is one of the big swings in favor of LSU going into this year. And it's funny because this will be by far the most hyped Ole Miss team maybe since the Eli Manning years. And this is one of, in terms of hype, probably a middle-ish tier LSU hype cycle here. So that game to me is the biggest game in the SEC in the middle-ish portion of the season, and LSU gets a huge rest advantage.
We posted some win probabilities for a number of teams, including LSU. Certainly took that into account. The first half of your analysis there with the bye week, but didn't necessarily realize that Ole Miss had that kind of run leading into Death
Right.
Valley. So yes, that should factor into that percentage take, which Ole Miss is considered decidedly a little bit better than LSU, but you swing that the home road favor plus that kind of stretch, and it favors LSU. I'm going to throw these rankings at you from Phil Steele. You tell me if anything stands out here as being egregious. So these are position unit rankings.
Okay.
Quarterback 41, running back 66, wide receiver 12, offensive line 6 on that side of the ball.
Yeah, quarterback might be a little too low, but I understand because Gary just doesn't have a whole lot of starts, so it's understandable. Running backs, that's semi understandable as well. There is a lot of uncertainty. There's not some proven superstar back there. Offensive line, I would be very interested in the 5 offensive lines he has ranked ahead of LSU. When your 2 offensive tackles are projected first round picks, and you do return both your guards, and the center is a better overall recruit and athlete than the center who you just lost. So yeah, I think all of those rankings are somewhat fair. So no crazy hot take in LSU's wide receivers being 12. That might be about where I would have them as well.
Offensive line rankings: Georgia 1, Texas 2, Oregon 3, Oklahoma State 4, Florida State 5, LSU 6.
Interesting. I don't know enough about Oklahoma State's offensive line or Florida State's offensive line. I know they're offensive coach Alex Atkins is a really good O-line coach at Florida State. But yeah, 6 is fair. But I think by the end of the season, Mark, they have a legitimate shot of winning the Joe Moore Award.
Defense: line 54, linebackers 22, DBs 36.
Yeah, and that is where it gets interesting.
Defensive line.
Yeah, it's a little bit higher than I thought. But they do return a lot of production at defensive end. Mark, this is on paper the weakest LSU defensive tackle room ever, at least in the modern era. And even pre-Saban, they had some really good defensive tackle rooms, as many people remember the Booger McFarland years. So it's kind of weird seeing them at 54. I thought they would be a lot lower. But if you factor in their defensive end play, they do return a really nice player in Braden Swinson, and they do have some other good recruits there. That makes sense. Linebacker's a little bit bigger of a concern for me, Mark. We'll see how Harold Perkins, moves into the new role. And what was the DB ranking again?
36.
Yeah, and that one to me is fairly high as well. Now, I know a lot of people are probably watching this thinking, well, LSU guy just hates LSU. No, I just try and be as objective as I possibly can. And like I said, all 3 of these units could very well, outperform their expectation. And I'll say this as a guest, as an LSU guest on every kind of neutral show, which this is. You're a national personality. This is, if you are a super diehard, like just college football fan, this will be the perfect litmus test of how much coaching matters versus talent, right? Because so many of these units on the defensive side of the football are returning the same exact players from last year's team to this year's team. So if this defense is better, and let's just say they exceed all those rankings you just gave, then coaching really does matter, maybe a little bit more than one would like to think. Because if Blake Baker really gets this unit, which returns a lot of players who were, to use a video game millennial term, mid, and make them great, then it truly shows you the power of a great defensive coordinator and a great defensive mind on all 3 levels of the defense.
So, Carter, that brings us to the job that Brian Kelly is doing, and even more so, the perception of the job that he's doing. So,
Yeah.
if this was pre-transfer portal, the thought that, okay, he took over a perennial powerhouse in name and brand and all of that, but the roster's a mess. He needs time. So, we're on year 3. First 2 years, I think most people would consider those to be successes, not overwhelming successes, but especially the first year. And then he comes into a year 3, and let's say they go 9-3. Now, of course, the postseason game is going to determine, okay, whether they elevate to like a top 11 or 12 versus maybe being down around 20. So that'll mean something. But as well as I do, going forward, the disparity in perception between making the playoff and not making the playoff is going to be gigantic, as opposed to before it was like, well, you got to be elite to make the playoff. Now it's going to be like, well, where are you? We don't care about your game in December. And there's going to be that perception there. So if they don't make the playoff, still go 9-3, there's going to be a thought that, okay, traditionally we would have expected this, but now we're in the transfer portal era. These things should be fixed quicker.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. So obviously, perception of the first year was phenomenal. Now, did LSU win a lot of close games and had a lot of things go their way in year one? Yes, but that was honestly a really tremendous job by Brian Kelly after a rough overall performance in that week one versus Florida State. But that was his very first game with the team. But after that, he coached a really, really good season. Last year will, be the biggest what if in LSU history, not going to the playoff with Jaden Daniels and Malik Neighbors. But, bad luck happens and the defense went rancid. So, Mark, I look at it like this from, an objective viewpoint, also just as a supporter of Brian Kelly. I feel the absolute scrape barrel of the bottom bare minimum that he needs to be able to do is make the playoff at least once in the next 2 years. All right. That is the absolute bare minimum. Now, a lot of LSU fans believe that he should be able to go to the playoff both seasons, but he's got a huge contract. The recruiting is really good for 2025. So I am fine just putting that out there. I feel he should be able to go to the playoff at least one out of the next 2 seasons with the way the schedule sets up with some of the young players that he has. I feel like that is a good baseline. And there's going to be a lot of people, Mark, like what you just said, that feel LSU should go to the playoff this year with the offensive line that you have and a really good quarterback and, a lot of money poured into the defensive side of the football. So, I am not there, but I do believe the expectation should be around 9-3.
Because this team got knocked out of playoff consideration about 2/3 of the way through the season last year, this is a ridiculous statement on the surface, but maybe Jaden Daniels was somewhat underappreciated by many across the country because they kind of checked out at one point. But just to review what he did, folks, look up the stats. It's historic what he was able to do with his legs combination with the arm. Garrett Nussmeier, a different type quarterback. So does AJ Swan play a big role in this offense? Are they going to get him on the field, do you believe, to replicate Jaden Daniels in any way?
No, because AJ's not anywhere close to Jaden Daniels in terms of running ability. And I don't think AJ Swan or Ricky Collins is close to Garrett Nussmeier. So this will be Garrett's job. And he'll have a relatively long leash because LSU's backup quarterback room is unproven. So, yeah, I mean, I don't see a 2-quarterback system or anything like that. And I really do believe Garrett this year will scramble more if given the opportunity to. That's something he's not really done. And he's mentioned in interviews being a little bit more apt with his legs. But with the offensive line that LSU has and the experienced running backs that they have, they might not need him to. So I feel as if Garrett is good enough to get this team to a playoff. I'm also feel good enough that Garrett Nussmeier can win you the college football playoff if he limits turnovers, which has been an issue with him. If that happens, LSU is definitely a team that can get to the dance.
Carter, the Power Hour LSU, Power Hour SEC, Power Hour NFL. That was a marketing and branding genius on your part. I love it. Love it. Recruiting, Damian Shanklin, huge get as a top 50 player, top 5 edge rusher. They bring him into the fold just in the last few days, along with Brandon Brown, a defensive lineman out of Florida. And everyone eyeing the decision next week of cornerback DJ Pickett, who's also looking at Oregon and Miami.
Yeah, we'll see what happens with that. It's tough because Oregon's got the momentum in all of recruiting. But overall, I look at it from a macro standpoint, Mark. this class will be a top 5 recruiting class in the SEC. So, or nationally, it'll be a miracle if they're not, with how well they have done up to this point. So, if DJ Pickett commits, obviously that would be, very huge. But they did a really good job recruiting the trenches, and a very underrated three-ish fringe 4-star player that they brought in was Brandon Brown. And I think Zion Williams, another defense tackle that they got committed, uh, very good stuff, replenishing the trenches. And, obviously DB will be the biggest position of need moving forward in recruiting. And I think LSU will close pretty strongly there.
Because of the concentration of the talent in state and then the brand that carries nationally, does every coach that walks into LSU, if they know what they're doing, just stay with that boilerplate approach? Or is Brian Kelly taking a different approach in any ways to what's been done in the past?
Yeah, so I do feel Brian Kelly has put together a good staff. I have always believed the label of being a good recruiter is overrated. And, the first thing that comes out of somebody's mouth about a coach is, well, this guy's a good recruiter. That's a massive red flag to me. There's a lot of data that shows us that the schools, the brand, historically, does the recruiting. But I do feel there are some outliers, and Bo Davis has proven this. Some Texas guys have now flipped and gone to LSU. So I still believe there is some credence to that. The one thing I do give Brian Kelly a lot of credit about when it comes to recruiting is the offensive line recruiting. It has never been this good at LSU. Never. Of course, occasionally they would get, a good in-state offensive lineman, Lyle Collins being one of them. But for the most part, this run of offensive line recruiting that LSU has been on has been unbelievable. I mean, they have 4 interior offensive linemen committed, and 3 of them are top 100 recruits. One was flipped from another SEC school to another. Brian Kelly's offensive line recruiting has been unfreaking believable. And that's what's really interesting about LSU. They have not had a first-round offensive lineman selected since 1998, which is still the wildest stat. And that player played his pro career and is already in the Hall of Fame. That's how long it's been. So it's very interesting that Brian Kelly's been able to change that narrative. You'll have 1, maybe 2 offensive linemen selected in next year's NFL draft in the first round, and there should be many more after that.
Carter, what's been going on your channels that people can tap into?
Yeah, Power Hour LSU. It's just, same old live streams. Everything. If you're a diehard LSU football fan, that's for you. Power Hour SEC and Power Hour NFL is more of just a macro deep dive kind of channel. Ironically, Mark, Arkansas fans dominate the SEC channel, Arkansas and Tennessee fans. And then the NFL channel is just kind of blown up. It's just kind of national stuff. The NFL is, the king for a reason. But I do a lot of breakdowns on SEC players and talk about one of the biggest rule changes in NFL history, which are these pineapple guardian caps, which will be allowed to be worn in games. And it's interesting. Your helmet shelf back there. You might need little miniature guardian caps on each and every one of those. So, how do you feel about that, Mark?
Feel about that as it pertains to my set. I don't think that's a good look. I
Yeah,
think that's a bad
but
look. You can't
not only
do that. But it's
yeah,
all
not
about
only your
safety.
set, but would you still like? For me, I'm all for player safety. I get it, but the branding of the sport changes so much if the players on the field have the caps on, because the helmets are so cool. So I think it does affect things.
Oh yeah, it's going to affect people's perception. They're going to like subconsciously think, "Am I watching like an exhibition game or a
Right.
spring practice or something?"
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Very odd. I was not aware of that.
Oh, okay. So if you want, it's the last video I posted. It's kind of blown up a little bit. So this year in the NFL, they approved, and I really don't know all the details. That's why I did the video, but they approved saying that you can wear those caps on the field. For those that don't know, it's like a Lego pineapple soft shell on top of your helmet. So if you don't know what that is, go to Power Hour NFL I go through all the nuances, and I play a lot of player interviews about how they feel about the cap. And I give my side of it, but I show both sides. And it's interesting, like how much helmet technology has changed. With a lot of different types of helmets that are out there right now. And Mark, it is insane how expensive every helmet actually is. Every like a good college football helmet's probably $300 minimum a piece. So it's absurd. So go check it out.
That's cool stuff. Yeah, it's going to look like spring practice because that's when people ask that question. What is going on with these guys? That's what it is. So we'll now see it in the NFL, and
Yeah,
I would think that the teams will put they'll need to put the brand on the
right.
shell. That's what they'll have to go with.
Yeah, but it won't. It'll look a lot.
Yeah,
It
it's
will
not going
look
to
alike.
have the same impact. And a lot of
Right.
guys are going to be, and I understand it, have a little too much ego and want to look good and probably not even want to consider it. And again, I
Right.
get that. It's kind of similar to the baseball batting helmets at one point that had no ear flap, and then they mandated the ear flap, but they let the old timers stay with that were already grandfathered in.
Right. It's a weird thing. But Mark, as always, thanks for having me, and we'll talk soon, my brother.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you being here.